I would not do that to them, not to their families. And here's where the account shifts. The craft had a seam. Harold describes it as running horizontally around approximately 2/3 of the shell, visible because the material on either side of it was very slightly different in texture, like the difference between two pieces of the same fabric that have been washed different amounts of times. The seam was not a door in any conventional sense. There was no handle, no hinge mechanism that anyone could identify on first examination, but it had already begun to open. This is something Harold repeats several times during the interview, and each time with what sounds like a quiet insistence, as though he anticipates disbelief. The craft was already in the process of opening when the team arrived. Not opened, not closed. Opening, slowly. Over the course of approximately 2 hours after the team's arrival, the upper section of the shell separated from the lower section by what Harold estimates was, at its widest point, about 14 inches. Why does this matter? Because it suggests the mechanism was internal, active, not triggered by impact, not by temperature change, or at least not only by those things. Something inside that craft was, in Harold's word, working. He uses that word 3 times. Working. The commanding officer at the scene made the decision to wait rather than attempt to force the seam further. Harold says this decision was made after 2 members of the team, he does not say which 2, reported feeling pressure behind their eyes when they stood within approximately 6 feet of the opening gap. One of them, Harold says, had a brief nosebleed. Harold himself says he felt nothing unusual and attributes this, with a dry kind of humour that surfaces a few times on the tape, to the Lord's mercy or bad luck, depending on how you look at what came next. What came next? I've listened to this section of the recording perhaps 40 times. I keep listening for the moment when Harold's voice changes. And it does change. Not dramatically. He doesn't become breathless or frightened. He becomes quieter, more measured, as though he's describing something he has spent 27 years deciding exactly how to describe. When the seam had opened to approximately 22 inches, Harold is specific about this, says he measured it against his own forearm. The commanding officer directed 2 men to use handheld electric torches to illuminate the interior. Harold was positioned approximately 15 feet back to the left. He says he had a clear line of sight. The interior, he says, was arranged. That's his word. Not cluttered, not mechanical in any way he could pass. Arranged. He describes a series of curved surfaces running along the interior walls, like the inside of an ear, and a central area that was lower than the surrounding structure, like a shallow bowl. Within the bowl there was what he describes as a translucent material, like smoked glass but soft-looking, almost liquid. And within that material, he says, there were 2 shapes, not instruments, not containers. He says they were forms like bodies but not lying down, curled, both of them curled the same way, like they were sleeping. I want to stop here and acknowledge what I know you're thinking, because I thought it too. This is the point in any account like this where credibility stretches, where the story starts to sound like a story rather than a testimony. I understand that instinct. I share it. But consider what Harold doesn't say at this point. He doesn't describe faces. He doesn't describe colour or size or any of the details that populate the cultural iconography of this subject. The large eyes, the grey skin, all of it. He says forms, curled, like sleeping. And then he says, one of them moved. Not both. One. Harold says the movement was subtle. A shift, like something settling. The way a person shifts when they're deep asleep and something disturbs them. The 2 men with the torches stepped back. The commanding officer called for quiet, though Harold says no one had been making noise. And then, he says, the material around them, the glass-looking stuff, it changed. It got darker, but also clearer at the same time, which doesn't make sense, but that's what I saw. And I thought, whatever is in there, it knows we're here. This raises a question that I cannot stop returning to. If the craft had been damaged in the crash, and by all accounts it had, the arroyo wall, the impact angle, why were two of its occupants apparently still viable? Had they survived the crash, or were they never in danger from it? Was the structure of that craft so far beyond anything we understood that what looked like catastrophic damage to us was, to them, manageable, survivable? And if they survived, what happened to them? Harold does not know. This is, I think, the most important thing about his account, what he doesn't know. He was removed from the